Welcome to the Bold Lounge podcast. My name is Lee Burgess, and I will be your host. If you're anything like me, you love hearing inspiring stories of people who have gone on bold journeys and made a positive impact in the world. This podcast is all about those kinds of stories. Every week, we'll hear from someone who has taken a leap or embarked on an extraordinary journey. In addition to hearing their stories, we'll also learn about their bold growth mindset that they use to make things happen. Whether they faced challenges or doubts along the way, they persisted and ultimately achieved their goals. These impactful stories will leave you feeling motivated and inspired to pursue your own bold journey. I believe everyone has a bold story waiting to be freed. Tune in and get ready to be inspired. Welcome to the Bold Lounge. Today I am excited to have Mita Mallick. She is the head of DEI of CARTA and also the author of an upcoming book, Reimagine Inclusion. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm so excited to kind of jump right into the definition of bold. Obviously, you're an author. You're leading a very important initiative in your role. And also, you have your own podcast.
Yes, I do. In fact, I do. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't introduce you as that, but you have a very incredible podcast, which has a huge following.
Oh, thank you.
And so what is your definition of bold?
I think that changes throughout our lives. I think our stories are constantly being rewritten. For me right now in this season, it is about finding my power, claiming my power, owning it, and holding on to it. Mm-hmm. That has been in this season of my life and career.
So finding, claiming, and holding on to it is bold, for sure. And realizing that our story changes. And I love how you said it's your season. Like, we do go through different parts of our life. Like, if we think about our 20s, 30s, 40s, I'm using age as a season, but it doesn't have to be age. It could be, different experiences of your story, right? Your story that's uniquely yours.
Absolutely.
So when you think about your definition of bold, and kind of claiming and finding, claiming, and holding on to who you are and that it's important. When was the first time you remember using that definition in your life?
Gosh, probably many times, but I would say as an adult, I was in a incredibly toxic bullying relationship at work with a then former boss. Mm-hmm. And I let that wear me down for too long. I was telling someone recently, it's like you give pieces of yourself away. And then at the end, you're left with nothing and you're trying to heal and reclaim all those pieces of yourself back. Mm-hmm. I was proud of myself that when I ultimately resigned in a conversation where I felt this person again was continuing to gaslight me. I can't believe you're resigning. I've been nothing but kind to you. And so finally I was like, that's not true. And I started to go into some of the things that I had experienced working for this person. I think they were taken aback because when bullies are confronted, they're usually surprised when they've been bullying for so long that the target is actually now standing up for themselves. And so that was a moment that I was proud of myself that I didn't, as I walked out the door, allowed that to continue to happen, that I reclaimed my power.
Yeah. So I bet there's a lot of listeners that can connect with feeling like they're in that type of environment, right? They're in a toxic environment. They're in an environment where they're not valued. They might be in an environment where they know they're really good at their job, but for some reason they're being told they're not.
Yes.
Like this perceived poor performance is like, I know I'm rocking it right now and you're telling me I'm not. So again, the gaslighting. So when you get to that point, it's being aware of it, right? Because when it's happening initially, you're just kind of, well, maybe I need to do something different, or maybe I needed to approach, sometimes we think internally, at least I do, like, what could I do differently, better? I'm sure there's something they need to do too, but I always think I got to start with me. So when people are noticing that moment of this doesn't feel right, this doesn't feel healthy, what are some of those indicators they should look for that you maybe felt?
I'll talk about it in the workplace specifically, but clearly we can have toxic personal relationships, friends, family, and our community. So this idea of toxicity can be anywhere in our lives. For me, actually, it was really interesting. I went from the office pet to the office threat. It is not something I have coined. It's well documented and researched by a Black woman who has put out a lot of research and thoughts around this. And so what that means is that Now, I don't identify as Black, but I do identify with the Black community. And actually, on our podcast, Roundtable Talk, that I do with my friend DC Marshall, we talked about this topic. And so, what that meant is that I was the shining star for this person who had hired me on their team. And then all of a sudden, as I was shining and doing well and doing all the things you think you're supposed to do, well, if I look good, my boss looks good and the company looks good. This is why you hired me for my expertise. And then over time, I became a threat to this individual. And that's when like the bullying and the gaslighting started. And so what those things can look like is, and let me just take a step back and give a definition of what I think gaslighting is.
Okay.
It is something that was coined in the 1970s. There's a very famous movie about it, but it's really like if we were sitting next to each other recording this podcast and I slapped you across the face and you said, "Why did you just slap me across the face?" And I said, "I didn't do that." And so I use that as like a very clear example of when it is. Yeah. I mean, you're like, "I didn't do that." You're like, "But you did." And I'm like, "No, I didn't." And I look at you smiling or just look at you dead in the eyes. And I'm like, "I did not slap you across the face. You just imagine that." Mm-hmm. So it's really, especially when it's between the employee and the boss, it can be a form of psychological abuse. It is the abuse of power and privilege. And you are trying to alter this person's sense of reality, diminish their self-worth. I started to question everything that was happening. Like, am I the one imagining all of these things? Yeah. And so it would be things like, "I never approved that. I never said that." It would be maybe privately telling me, "I am never going to get promoted here. No one else will ever hire me," saying terrible things to me in private, but then in public saying, "Oh, Mita's on her way to becoming a VP. She's amazing." It would be excluding me from meetings. It would be saying, "Yes, I want you to come and present your proposal Wednesday at 10 a.m. And I would wait and wait and wait and text and figure out where this meeting was, never get the invite. It was like it never happened. And then a leader would maybe the next day call me and say, "Oh, like your proposal was great. Your boss said you were on vacation and couldn't attend." So all sorts of things start to happen that start to escalate. I think also when you can be the target of bullying at work, those individuals in power are very good at isolating individuals. So interesting thing is where there's smoke, there's fire. I think after the fact, years later, I was like, wow, there were other people going through this at work too, but we didn't realize, right? We weren't talking about it because we had become so isolated from each other.
Yeah, it's kind of one of the tactics with it, right?
Yes.
That's how they succeed at it.
Absolutely.
And it serves their purpose, whatever that purpose is. I've never figured that part out. Other than just it's all about them.
Well, I think hurt people, right? Yeah. And not to go deep, I'm not a psychologist, but when you lash out and you want to hurt someone else and cause so much pain, there's something inside you that's causing you to do that some trauma that you haven't healed from.
Yeah.
We bring that to our workplaces with us, whether we realize it or not.
Yeah. So when we think about kind of reclaiming that, finding it, first of all, like you had to, it sounds like you finding it again because it had gone away.
Yes.
What does that look like? That whole process of finding, reclaiming, and holding on, like kind of walk me through that. Cause I visualize like a process map there.
I don't know if there's a process, except it's like everyday steps.
Yeah.
Of when you walk away from my example, from a very toxic situation, how do you find those pieces of yourself again? Mm-hmm. And it's day by day, reminding yourself of the things you're good at, focusing on those things, having people around you who love you, your community who lifts you up to tell you, yes, you are good at these things, finding a new place where you can make impact in whatever you choose to do. And so I think it's slowly over time, it's like not one big thing that happens, but every single day, just being regrounded, recentered, and reminding yourself of the impact you can make and that the power that you have. But when it's been taken away and you've been silenced for so long and you've been diminished and been made to feel invisible, it's hard.
Yeah.
It takes a toll.
Yeah. And I think the healing is a process. It's not.
Yes, it is.
It is not, I left a job without having a job because it just had become, I was burnt out. And
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
think some of the burnout came from the toxicity, but I think regardless, I made the decision and I realized that I couldn't just jump right into something new. I needed to actually pause for a second and I need to come back into me. I need to be me again, because I just didn't feel like me. So I think that's the one thing I want listeners to realize is like, it's not an overnight, like, oh, I went to the spa and I did
No,
hair and this or that. I was like, well, great. Reading a good book on a weekend isn't going to take you from Friday to Monday and you're better. Like it's a process.
it takes time. Yeah. And sometimes things can trigger you and bring you back to those moments, even when you feel like you've healed. But part of when we talk about, for me, writing has been healing.
Yeah.
People ask me why I write so much. It's my superpower. I always joke. I don't have hobbies. I don't bake. I don't ski. I don't paddleboard. I don't really like to travel. My husband makes me go places, but I love my family, friends, my kids, and I love writing. And so there's a lot of healing. And even you and doing your podcast and the conversation we're having right now, like it's amazing. It's a vehicle for storytelling and there's healing. People
Yeah.
will listen to this and say, "Oh my God, that's my story. Her story is my story." And then you feel just a little less alone, a little less alone.
Yeah, there's so much power in story, right? And the power of writing, you're actually creating that story. You're creating or sharing or inspiring someone through your lived experience.
Mhm.
From the type of book that you wrote. So you wrote Reimagine Inclusion, which comes out October 3rd. So
Yes.
super, super excited for everyone to get that. The information to pre-order is in the episode notes. But tell me a little bit about how, like, did you set out to write that book? When you say you were writing, like, were you just writing in the sense of, like, I want to get this out? Because a lot of, journaling and those types of things, that's considered writing in my
Yeah. Of course. So the book is called Reimagine Inclusion, Debunking 13 Myths to Transform Your Workplace, and it's available for pre-order on Amazon right now. So hope you'll go check it out. My mother reminded me I've been writing ever since I could pick up a crayon.
Okay.
I've always wanted to write. I remember being the proud co-editor of my fifth grade elementary school newspaper. I wrote a screenplay in high school that was like my version of like The Big Fat Indian Wedding. And then I went to undergrad and I had a friend when I graduated, one of my best friends helped me find an agent. And I wrote 3 novels. Yes, 3 novels that have not been published. But, I was young and stubborn back then. And so I'd write the first novel and I'd get feedback and from editors at big publishing houses. And I'd say, well, I don't want to change this. I'll just write another novel. And I wrote 3 novels. My agent dumped me in a very mean way over email. And so then I thought, what am I going to do with my life? Like I still love writing, but I don't think writing is going to pay the bills. So I went to get an MBA because there was a very strong connection between storytelling and marketing. So I went to get my MBA. And would you believe I wrote a 4th novel? And I tried to find an agent, couldn't get it published. And then I moved a year ago and I'm like looking through boxes. I had like another nonfiction proposal. Let me tell you, I have always wanted to write and be an author. And I buried the seed of writing. I just buried it away. Like this is never going to happen for me. And what happens when you bury a seed? It starts to grow, whether you realize it or not. And so it always just kept coming back to me and finding me. So I've been writing for a very long time. I'm not an overnight success. I wrote this book 4 years ago. It took me a very long time to get published, and I got a lot of interesting feedback on the way. But I wanted to really put a book out there, knowing that there's lots of good books on leadership, culture, inclusion. What could I, Mita Mallick, add to the marketplace? Like what would be different? And I wanted to say all the quiet parts out loud of all of these myths and stories we hold on to in our workplaces that actually hold us back from making progress. And so that's why I wanted to put out the book.
Yeah. So a lot of things in there. So what were your first 4 novels about?
They were about being bicultural, being trapped between 2 cultures, being trapped between, I'm the proud daughter of Indian immigrant parents, born and raised in the US with my younger brother, but what it means to be bicultural and how you're trapped between Indian culture and American culture. And so those novels had those themes in them.
Yeah. So each one of those, do you think that they, at least getting it out and getting it written, and obviously that's a talent.
Oh, thank you.
In an area of expertise of like getting it out and then gaining it to, where you started this book, Reimagine Inclusion. Do you think that helped?
Absolutely. I appreciate that you say I'm talented in writing. I am. I enjoy it. It's my superpower, but it's also half discipline, right?
Yeah.
Writing is half art, half discipline. And so the more you write, the better you get at it. So I've been writing for a very long time. So when people say, oh my God, you have a book coming out, or look at your LinkedIn following and how much content you put out.
It's a lot of
I write
work.
yeah,
Yeah.
and I enjoy it too, right? I'm at this point in my life where I want to only do things that spark joy as much as I can. Doesn't always happen that way, but I do it because I enjoy it.
Yeah.
I'm not someone who enjoys video as much. I do it, but you won't see me on TikTok. And that's great. If that's someone else's jam and they're really good at it, that's
Yeah.
great. That's
Go
their
for it.
superpower.
Yeah.
Right. But I write like 20 minutes a day. Some of it will never see the light of day, and that's okay. I do it really because I enjoy it. And what I've discovered over the years is we talked about what does it mean to be bold. Part of reclaiming my power was also to be sharing the things I've been through. And through that, I've been able to build community and conversation, which has been really powerful.
Yeah. And that's healing in itself too.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Being able to kind of like, okay, I can actually talk about that now and it doesn't trigger me, or I can help someone, or I know that that thought came up and I don't need to stick with it. It can go away. Like you said, I really do think that's part of the journey too of the story, is like helping others go through it, understand it,
Yes.
but realize that each journey's different, and you know, how you experienced it versus how they experienced it. It may have some similarities, but it's still their personal journey. So that doesn't change. Yeah. So I definitely think, from the perspective of being able to talk about your writing, it's intentional and it's disciplined. It's not luck.
No,
Like,
people say, oh, you're lucky. I'm like, no, I earned it. I earned it. There's always a little bit of luck in things, but honestly, it's the hard work you put behind it. When it's like when luck meets opportunity,
yeah,
right? Those things collide together.
exactly. 100%. It's also the belief that you can. I wrote a post today around belief versus hope. Like, oh, I hope I can write a book. I hope I can get that job. I hope, well, hope away. You're going to have to act on it. That's why I think belief is active, right?
I love that.
Hope is passive.
Yeah.
So like you believed you could do it, and obviously you were doing it, but it wasn't exactly where you wanted it to be or the way that you wanted it. So one of the things that was bold in your journey right there was like, it's just not going to be their novel. It's my novel. They don't like that. I don't want to change it. Now, there's probably a dial on that, right?
Yes, there is. Yeah, there is. Especially when you're earlier on in your career and you don't want to receive that feedback. Listen.
Yeah.
Feedback is a gift, right? Feedback is a gift, and you can keep it, you can exchange it, you could take it, you could do whatever you want with it. But I also say, like, when you hear the same sort of things from people, maybe you can stop and listen. And there's a balance to that. Yeah. There's a balance to that.
Yeah, we have a rule on our team. Like if we talk about it 3 times, like we need to meet about it.
Yes, then something's happening.
Something's off. We're not figuring it out just by having a quick conversation or a quick call. We need to sit down and give it some time. And so like, yeah, if you do get that feedback, and I think that just comes also with experience of our life. I always say, I just wish I knew that when, but at the same time, I'm glad I learned it, because if I didn't actually go through something, I wouldn't even understand it, right? I wouldn't understand the vantage point. So there's kind of the yin and the yang of experience and time, is that it takes time to actually to succeed and get some of the things that you want. And I think sometimes in the world we live in, people want things instantaneously. And I can be guilty of that, but they don't want to work for it. They don't want to put the intention into it or the discipline. Well,
yeah. I mean, we live in a world now where everyone wants things to be microwavable in 30 seconds or less, or while we're talking, let me pick up my phone and order a Chipotle burrito bowl. It'll be here in the time we finish, right? And with this like instant gratification, and that the way in which we've been raised, and then also how our children are being raised, which is something I think about a lot.
Yeah.
Like I said, I'm not an overnight success. I put a lot of hard work and effort, and it's all the little things that added up to what seems like the big thing, which is the book coming out. But there's a lot of work behind it.
Yeah. So when you think about the process for the book, and I'd love to hear some of the pieces that came in, the researching the myths.
Yeah.
With the myths that are out there around inclusion. And sometimes I get impatient and frustrated with, we know better. We know this can't be the right way to do something, or we know that that's actually not true, but we keep doing it. Yes. Did that come through in some of the myth definitions and some of the things that you found out with the book?
So like I said, I've been working on the book for a while. And for anyone who's listening, if you've ever heard of this or done this, I encourage you to do it. I have career journals. And so I write down a lot of the experiences I've had in my career and I document them. So that was part of, having had a long career, to go back to some of those ideas. And also being a writer, writing for Harvard Business Review, Adweek, Fast Company. Those are some of the pieces I've been putting out over the years, watching what's happening in the marketplace. So there was the collection of stories, the data, the insights, putting them all together. And I wanted to debunk myths and really give leaders a practical way to think about things. So one of my myths, there's 13. 13 is my lucky number. That's why it's 13. People might ask, why 13? There's more than 13. Maybe there'll be a sequel. But so the myth that we believe all women will become mothers, that by extending maternity leave or parental leave, which we should actually be calling it, I call it in the book, that's what it takes to build an inclusive culture for women. And the bias I've heard over my career, and the motherhood penalty, that's very well researched, that I include in the book, the motherhood penalty versus the fatherhood premium. So for every child my husband has had, he is more stable, committed, more ambitious. He'll actually get paid more for each child he has. Whereas for each child I've had, I'm just a disheveled mess, right? Mm-hmm. Like I am less ambitious, I'm less committed, all those things that we put upon women. And really talking about like building an inclusive culture for mothers working outside the home is more than just leave, and really talking to leaders about that and providing actionable tips. But the other thing I take on this myth is gendered ageism, which we don't talk a lot about. Women never seem to be the right age at work. It's probably that 1 year that you were the golden age, right? You're either too young or you're too old. And the biases where it's like, oh, I don't know if Mita has the energy to keep up with the pace here. What does that mean? I don't know if Mita has the level of professional maturity to put her in front of a customer, right? And so it's like, oh, Mita has all these years of experience, so we're labeling her old. Or Mita seems young and sounds young and dresses young, or whatever we might say.
It's kind of like an avocado.
Yeah.
It's like we're waiting for it to mature. And then like it happens.
Yeah.
You are that golden age. Like it was probably for me I was 42. Like I feel like everything, but I had gotten to a role. I was a chief research operations officer at 42. And that's pretty great. But then I was like, what's next? And then it was like, well, that's it. You're there. And I'm like, okay.
And so, I talk a lot about in the book about the different standards we have for men versus women.
Yeah.
These are not conversations we have about men, or these are not stereotypes or biases we have in our head that then we either knowingly or unknowingly act upon at work, right? And those small everyday decisions and the really big decisions. And so that's one of the ways in which I try to really debunk the myth with, of course, a powerful story, because I love storytelling of examples of things that have happened in our workplaces and why they're not true or how they could have a different ending.
What is your hope that once we know that it is a myth, what will individuals and organizations do differently moving forward?
I love that question. We are all chasing inclusive cultures. Mm-hmm. I don't think I've met a single leader who doesn't say they don't want their culture to be inclusive. But here's the thing, we make up the culture. It's like when we talk about the employee and the company, they're not two different things. They're one and the same. And so how I, Mita, as a leader, show up every day at work matters. It matters a lot, because how I show up has a ripple effect on my team, my colleagues, cross-functional partners throughout the organization. And so if we each just showed up differently tomorrow, thought about one thing we were going to do different, imagine the ripple effect we'd have. And so one of the things I talk about in Reimagine Inclusion is that we can have the systems and processes in place to do right by our people, our company, but it all comes down to the individual and how we act in that moment, right? So I'll give you an example of another myth I talk about, which is a true story of something that happened to me. Why are you asking for a raise? Your husband makes more than enough money. Okay. Why are you asking for a raise? Your husband makes more than enough money. And this is, years ago when I was having a performance review, I knew I was being underpaid, had done the research, all the things they tell us. What are the points on the board? Go during performance review time, make sure you have marketplace examples, understand how your role is valued in the market. And that was the response I got from my then manager, because he had somehow found out what my husband did for a living. And so what I talk about in that myth is that there is a myth that white women and women of color don't negotiate, right? We do negotiate, and often we're gaslit, dismissed, and minimized when we do. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things in that part of Reimagine Inclusion I ask leaders to do is really to think about their experience and their upbringing with money. Because if we're uncomfortable with money and we weren't taught to talk about money, all of a sudden, when you come to ask me for a raise, why am I triggered? Versus, let's say Jim comes and asks me for a raise. Am I triggered when Jim asks me? Why or why not? And so in that case, what I just mentioned is many companies silently and quietly are doing pay equity analysis behind the scenes. Employees just don't know it. But it all really depends on me as an individual. when you come and ask for your pay to be reviewed, why am I triggered?
Mm-hmm.
And how am I open to that conversation or shut it down? Because here's the thing, to anyone listening, if you were running a team today, please don't wait for HR to come and tell you your team's not being paid fairly and equitably. It's your job.
Right.
It's your job. You have the data, the information, and then bring in your HR partners and ask for help. But we're all waiting for someone to come tell us what to do. It's like, no, check your team, especially in this market. People are moving on. People are coming in. Get it? Compensation can fluctuate as you bring in new team members. So it's your job as a leader to make sure your team is being paid fairly and equitably. It's that simple.
Yeah. Sometimes you have to tell the story of that too. I think in my experience, I was definitely usually the one bringing it up because I'm seeing people leave to go somewhere else, or I'm seeing people not happy in their roles, or I know from the data. So it's the combination of, the hard pieces as well as the observational, the tactical pieces with our roles. And that is our job, I think, as leaders of others, is to advocate and to also kind of bring up things that someone else is not bringing up. I think it's not easy in some organizations to do that. I think you can, I think in those situations, and that's not a reason not to do it. Trust me. I'm not saying that, but I think,
it's hard.
Yeah. Making sure that you do it in the way that is thoughtful and pragmatic within the institution that you're in. I think the other thing that you said was talking about your money mindset. If there's things that when things are coming up, like you have to realize that if there are triggers to someone, like when a female asks for a raise versus a man asks for a raise, why is it different? That person, like, for example, that you were saying you were actually negotiating and doing what Alex Carter tells us all to
Yes, Alex. Yes. Listen, she's in my book and my acknowledgments. She's part of my story to get my book published. Love it. Yes.
She makes it so obvious what you should be doing, but it doesn't feel, it's simple, but not easy, right? So I think it's simple in the sense of the context of what I need to do. I need to negotiate your worth.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
It doesn't feel easy, I think, especially for women and women of color to do that. And so I think that's where I think is just making sure the myth you just talked about that people hear, like, you need to still do it, and you need to do it not only for you, but for your team.
And, and ask the open-ended questions. I've been in so many talent reviews, as I'm sure you have in your career, where I've heard things like, well, Mita's the primary breadwinner. We don't need to give her a retention bonus. Mita, the 5% merit increase, that her husband, Jim, is in sales and he's killing it. So we can move that down to 3%. Did you see Mita carries a Birkin bag to work? I don't think she's here for the money. What? Yeah. Right? And, we've all heard some sort of piece of those stories when we're sitting there. And so the question is, well, tell me more about that. How does what you just described tie to Mita's day job? Mm-hmm. Let's go back to the metrics of what she's delivered.
How's she performing?
So how she performed, what points did you, and so I think oftentimes, like you said, it's scary because I'm not going to deny that, particularly where you are in your organization, there's power, there's politics, there's privilege. But by asking simple ended questions to say, can you tell me a little bit more about that as we're reviewing Mita's salary? Can we go back to what she's done in this job versus her peers versus her goals, and to just redirect the conversation? I've also been in situations where, back to the motherhood penalty, I've been in rooms where it's like, well, I know Mita's up for this big promotion, but she just had a baby. She's not going to be able to travel. And, let's stop and say, okay, have we asked Mita that? Is that something that she shared with you? Or are we making decisions for her career without asking her? Because if Mita was a man, that conversation would likely never happen.
Would not happen. Yeah. I heard someone say the other day, we're supposed to lead like we don't have a family, and we're supposed to mother like we don't have a job.
Ooh.
And I was like, well, there's some power in that. And I probably bumbled it a little bit, but you got the sense of what I was saying. Like, the expectation of us.
Yes.
We're supposed to forget the other half of us when we're in the situation that we're in. And either we're not a good enough mother because we're paying too much attention to our job or doing too much with our job, or in a workplace we're thinking too much about our family, or we're leaving early to go to the play or whatever. And I think that's also a big myth. The balance, or what you're supposed to do 50-50, like some days it's 80-20, like it's just, that's the way it's got to
be. Yes. But I think sometimes it's like the double life.
Yeah.
That, the expectations. I remember starting my career, and I'll never forget, I worked for a woman who, it was probably a year into the job that I found out she had children.
Wow.
that she never talked about her children at work ever. And so I was raised a bit like that,
Yeah.
thinking I'm not supposed to talk about my kids
Yeah.
at work because I don't see anyone else talking about them. And this was at the time beauty industry. And then I worked for a manager and she had 4 kids and talked about them all the time. And I was like, wow, I guess you can talk about your children. Right. But it's like trying to hide these parts of ourselves where I do think, there's the fatherhood premium. Like a man talks about his kid. Is it received differently than a woman does? Right. Does she say like, and that's where I tell people, it's like the amazing part of the human brain is like, we can think all these things in our head and no one can hear them. So interrogate those thoughts and hold on to them and then make a different decision when you're ready to act.
Right.
Because if we think that when Mita talks about her kids, it seems like she's distracted, she's not committed. But when my husband talks about his kids, do we say, oh, father of the year, look at him putting in extra hours to watch his kids? You're like, no, he's not babysitting. They're his kids too. But like, those are some of the biases we have in our head. And if we can be honest about ourselves to like interrogate them and to debunk them, dismantle them in our heads before we actually act, that's the work I want people to do after having read the book.
Yeah. Excellent. So I think that's a key point there too. Sometimes the voice or the thinking is actually between our ears. And it doesn't mean it doesn't exist out, but it maybe gets amplified internally first. Like, oh, I can't ask for a raise. They'll think I'm this, or, it's a bold move to self-advocate.
It is.
And I think that's something I learned early on, and probably by my raising too, just my parents. Like, I didn't think I always felt like I belonged at the table. Like, what do you mean you don't want to hear my opinion? But that gets you in trouble in your 30s when you're in an organization that's not all about your opinion, and they don't they love what you do, but they don't want you to always be you.
Sure.
So I think there's a learning there, but I think it is a bold move to think about what's coming up in my head that's mine, and what is this, probably come from just what is an external expectation or a place where it actually isn't the right thing, how we should be thinking. Like you said, like if a man does this, it's wonderful. But if a woman talks about her kids, oh, she's distracted. Like that came up and I was like, what like, where'd that come from?
But we've been socialized, right?
Yeah,
there's been so much over the years.
Yeah.
But you've been bombarded for years and years. Some of the things you've known and not known.
Right.
Media, walking down the street, family conversations, film, magazines. I mean, it is everywhere. And now with social media and how social media has changed our lives over the last 10 years, you can't escape it. You just reminded me, one of my so people ask me what kind of music do I listen to right now? And I say I listen to what my kids are listening to. So my 8-year-old daughter is a big Taylor Swift fan, and she loves the new song Antihero.
Okay.
And there's a line in it, if you've heard the song, that says, "Hi, it's me. I'm the problem. It's me." And I keep thinking about that line a lot because it is how I felt most of my life. And I talk about this in the beginning of Reimagine Inclusion, that I've been chasing inclusion my whole life. And I always thought I was the problem, right? Like I needed to work harder, faster, better. I didn't do enough to fit in or belong. It was me. Like I needed to change me. And then there comes this point you say, wow, it's not me. I'm not the problem. I'm trying to survive, thrive in systems and processes that were never designed or meant for people who looked like me. And so there's this like moment I've had over the years thinking about that, like, wow, it's just this big awakening moment to think, you've spent your whole life thinking that you were the problem when it's really that the world wasn't built for you. And hopefully we're changing that.
Yeah. Or you might not be in the place that actually deserves your gift.
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
Because I think that's also something I think comes with time too, is when you're chasing something so hard. And I think we get programmed to like the next level, the next role, the next title, the next raise. At least in my world, it felt like you were just on those stair steps. And if you weren't doing it, you were failing. You get to a certain point, I think, as a woman too, you're like, okay, I'm looking around and I know that I'm working harder, or I know I know more.
Twice as hard. Yeah.
Yeah. But I'm still in a lower role and I've got to advocate for me. So what advice would you give for someone, just in the sense of don't give up, but maybe figure it out differently, right? Because maybe you're not in the right space or place, or it doesn't have to be leaving a place altogether. But what advice would you give someone to stop chasing?
Stop chasing. I love that. One of the things I came to realize in my career, and I talk about in Reimagine Inclusion, is that I was over mentored and under sponsored. I'll say that again, over mentored and under sponsored. And people come at me in social media when I say this. Listen, mentors are important. I have a lot of mentors. After this, we might be peer mentors for each other. Like we might get to know each other.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. You're never going to be my career sponsor. I won't say never, but not in this moment. Right. You don't sit at my company. You're not 2 levels above. You don't have the political, social capital to open doors for me, to invest in my career, to advocate for me. And as my career sponsor, Gail Tifford, once told me, do you know who's talking about your career when the doors are closed? And I thought, God, doors are closed and people are talking about me. I had no idea. But I have been really lucky in my career, lucky, and I earned it. I've had a lot of great career sponsors. And so we need help in our workplaces. I am tired as a woman of color of advocating for myself. We are all tired. We need people to help advocate for us. We need people to say our names when we're not in the room. We need people to know our value and worth. We need them to open doors to the C-suite, get us coffee with the CEO, get our name on the slate for a job that we didn't even know had opened up, get us on a special task force, all of those things. That's what we need. We need to go from mentorship to sponsorship in our organizations. And so that's my advice to anyone listening. The question is like, whose career are you fighting for other than your own? Like, who else are you trying to lift up in your organization? And then for people listening who are looking for sponsors, I spent too much of my career with my head down. My dad, rest in peace, would always say to us, keep your head down, work hard, stay out of trouble, and you'll be recognized. I never looked up enough to be like, yes, my work is important, but people understanding the value of my work and impact is equally as important, not just the work, but being able to advocate and tell the story. And so think about who in the organization needs to be knowing what you're working on other than your boss. You don't need 5 career sponsors. You certainly need 1 or 2.
Yeah, I think I'm mentored out.
Yes. Mentored out.
Everybody sponsor up.
T-shirt. I think that's a t-shirt.
Yeah.
Mentored out.
Yeah, like burned out, but I'm mentored out. You know, I think I felt I always sponsored others, but I don't think the majority of my career anyone sponsored me. I think I had a lot of mentors, but I think it was definitely something that is missing in a lot of organizations. So you also might have to be actively looking for your sponsor. Don't think someone's going to assign you your sponsor, you know?
No, you have to be actively thinking about it and be strategic.
Yeah. Any key tips on finding the right sponsor or characteristics of a sponsor?
Yes. So one of the things, I'll give an example. I think examples work really well.
Okay.
So if I'm a senior marketing manager in an organization and I've been asked to do an analysis on our media investments for the last year, what did we invest in and why? And like, was there a return on investment? Other than my boss, who do you think might be interested in that analysis? I think the chief financial officer. I think anybody in the finance office would be interested in that. So there's an opportunity for me to reach out to, depending on the size of the company. Let's say it's a smaller company. I could reach out to the CFO directly and say, wanted to have coffee with you, wanted to share this analysis I'm working on. So I take a meeting to show the value of my work and what I'm working on. She is likely going to give me some advice and say, oh, this is a great start. Why don't you do X, Y, and Z? And then I might say to her, do you mind if I come back to you in a month and show you what I've been working on or send you an update over Slack or email? And she'll be like, yes, sure. And then slowly over time, I'm building the relationship. I'm going to her with added value. And I'm trying to think about where my work overlaps in the organization. Because here's the thing, when I shine, you shine. If I'm working on something that her team's going to want to be involved in and get credit for, she's going to want a seat at that table. And then guess what? When there's a talent review and next time my name comes up, she's probably going to say, I know Mita. She's been working on this great analysis. I've been inputting and actually I do. Yeah, we should definitely put her name up for promotion. Like I'm 100% supportive, right? So you're not going to get a sponsor just because you want to get a sponsor. And it's not like the best friend necklace from high school. You don't run around saying, can I have a sponsor? You have to be no friendship relations. You have to be strategic about this. Think about, and I can help anyone do this. You just think about, what are you working on right now? What are your 3 to 5 priorities and projects? And other than your boss, who else in the organization might be interested in this? And that you might align yourself with based on the work.
Yeah.
Because here's the thing. I've had a lot of great bosses and I've had a lot of not so great bosses. People would argue that your boss should be your career sponsor. That's not always the case.
Yeah.
And sometimes, depending on your level, your boss might not be in the room when they're talking about promotions. It might be your boss's boss, right? That advice that Gail Tifford gave me, I still think about. You have to actually think about who is actually at work. Do you know who's judging your work and who's rating you?
Mm-hmm.
Because if you don't know who's sitting at that table, virtual table, doors closed, you don't know who's advocating for you. You have to figure out who those people are and make sure at least one person in that room knows what you're working on and knows your worth and can tell the story.
Yeah, great tips. So I am so excited for folks to read your book, to pre-order your book, learn more about the myths, and make a difference and stop chasing. So I think, from the specifics of the book, I think it will really help people understand some of the things that either come in externally or internally, and how they are myths, and how we actually can get a dent in some of the things that I think simply stated are possible, but they've for some reason become overly complicated and achieved in organizations. So if we really want it, I think it's possible. So thank you so much for being on the Bold Lounge and sharing your hard work and expertise of your book.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciated it.
Thank you for listening to the Bold Lounge podcast. Through the continuum of bold stories, vulnerability to taking a leap, you will meet more extraordinary people making a positive impact for others through their unique and important story. By highlighting these stories, we hope to inspire others and share the journey of those with a bold mindset. We hope you've enjoyed this podcast and look forward to sharing the next bold journey with you.